Hello there, good to see you again. Um, as anyone who's been at our prayer meetings recently will know, one of the things that I've been praying for regularly is the people who are the scientists who are working on the vaccine. And I was, in doing so, obviously thinking, strategically, that's a good thing to pray for. I wasn't consciously thinking I'm praying for um, Christians. I suppose if I'd thought about it, there's Christians. There's a disproportionate number of Christians in the medical world, so I guess that would have made sense. But the thing is, this is Time magazine. So this is June the 11th, and Time magazine did this feature um, on the guy in America who is overseeing, at a kind of managerial role, the various investigations and attempts to get a vaccine. It's not just in America, it's various parts around the world. There's one down in Oxford University, and there's obviously there's actually a production unit that's been, I think, I saw it on the Scottish news that it's just been given kind of funding to sort of start production of a kind of initial vaccine. Anyway, when I saw this thing in Time magazine, this is having an effective vaccine by the end of this year is achievable. And they were quoting this guy called Dr. Francis Collins, because in America, he is the director of National Institutes of Health. And so he's a big noise in the scientific world. He actually headed up the Human Genome Project, which mapped the genetics of the entire human body, and so he's quite a kind of big noise in the whole situation. In May, he joined the White House Corona Task Force. I'm not sure if that's a blessing or a curse. And you know how there's the guy that you sometimes see in the White House briefings, less so now. There's a doctor called Dr. Anthony Fauci. Well, Francis Collins is his boss. You don't see Francis Collins that much, but he's the one who's kind of in overall kind of control of the situation. And because I had been praying for the virus, I thought, interesting article, I'll find out some more. So they asked the first question: do you have best guess of when we might have a vaccine for COVID-19? Having an effective vaccine by the end of the year is achievable, but let no one imagine that it's a done deal. People say it's like going to the moon. You just decide to do it, which I guess is the way you have to approach it. But given the fact that he's in America, they have another concern with vaccine. The thing is, it's in this country, it's not quite so to the fore, but just Time magazine asks, are you worried when you get a vaccine, people won't accept it? They're talking about this thing where you have what they call anti-vaxxers, people who are against vaccination in principle. It's a kind of conspiracy plot type bunch of folks. Am I worried? Naively, I thought if people actually saw a disease around them that was causing suffering and death of people they knew, they would have a harder time resisting the idea that this could be our best hope as a nation. But I'm seeing our best hope, but I'm seeing stirrings that may not actually have turned out to be true. It's a bit concerned. Even you could make a wee sim illustration out of it, but it's just, even when you have a vaccine, even when you have, this is the answer to the situation, the problem that we've got, it doesn't necessarily mean people always kind of embrace the solution. And then I mean, it is because this interview, he did various interviews with various magazines, and so you'll find all over the media this kind of assessment, because he's the guy to go to get find out what the proximity, the speed with which the vaccine is going to get produced. But because this interview is by Time magazine, you get this kind of question. You have in the past called yourself an evangelical, but it seems in our current situation that people pushing back at the need for drastic actions to deal with the coronavirus are often people who would call themselves evangelicals. Why do you think that is? Time magazine will always go for the kind of spiritual option. They include questions about faith in a readily kind of direct way. And I wasn't thinking that in the middle of a discussion about when's the vaccine coming, we were really going to have a talk about the man's faith. But in Time magazine, you do. Here's what he says. You'll hear from the extreme views because they make news. But I actually think most believers don't buy into the idea that this is a conspiracy, nor do they buy into the idea that you can ignore public health recommendations. Those rare ones who do, and assemble anyway, who say, I don't need a vaccine because I got Jesus, those are probably not representing the majority by far of people who know that science is the best hope that we've got in this crisis, and also believe in God. I guess first and foremost, you should just recognise that the person who, at least in America, and probably has more money backing his particular avenues of research than any other individual group, that individual is somebody who has been put there on the basis of his ability, clearly, but he's a Christian. And he would call himself an evangelical. What I mean is, obviously there's all kinds of faith in America, even down to people who just stand in front of a church and, hold up a Bible badly. I just think it's actually worth knowing. It's good that you would know that one of the key folks in this whole enterprise of trying to find a vaccine is a committed Christian. Then there's a specific question, which just kind of goes off at a tangent. Again, that's quite Time magazine like. He asks, what has surprised you most about this pandemic? And because he's a scientist, he gives a very specific answer. But it's also interesting because it's the primary reason why this pandemic is a pandemic, as opposed to a disease that kills some people but we get quickly and kill. What has surprised you most about this pandemic? I was unprepared for a virus that could infect people without any symptoms and have them be highly infectious. That's new. The main reason why this is a pandemic is you can catch this virus, you don't even know you have it yourself, and you infect loads of people for up to a fortnight. That is something which is genuinely something that hasn't really been that common. That is new. Then we get to the last question. You wrote in your book, The Language of God, that the principles of faith are complementary with the principles of science. Since it's impossible to prove that God exists, how can this be true? Faith, as you say, does not involve proof, but there's certainly plenty of rational arguments to support the belief in a creator God. That's where I found myself at age 27 when I was trying to prove my atheism and discovered that atheism is probably the least rational of all the choices because it takes the position of asserting a universal negative, which scientists in general are discouraged from doing. There are lots and lots and lots of people who have heard it proclaimed, usually by some zealous atheistic scientist, that science and faith are, enemies, and you have to choose one or the other. Maybe you've just happened on this particular YouTube channel and you've not really kind of come looking for this, but I'm just putting, maybe that's what you think yourself. I'm just suggesting, with as many lives on the line, with as many economies and businesses and income on the line as there is, you don't put a guy in charge of discovering what the vaccine is who's not really, really good at his job. He's not there because he's a nice guy who's got a kind of old sage-like face. He's there because he's the best at what he does. And in a world full of scientists, he's clearly articulating the fact that the scientific outlook, which he is using and embracing and going great guns with to get a vaccine, is in no fashion contradictory with somebody who takes his viewpoint on life as a faith viewpoint. There are times where Christians feel a bit intimidated, and there are other times when people who are agnostic or even atheists who feel Christians just haven't a clue. I mean, they're nice, but it's good to have a wee little nice feeling. Quote a couple of Bible verses, Mr. Cathcart. It makes me feel better. But when you have the kind of hard-nosed, detailed analysis of scientifically trying to find a vaccine, then we need people who are scientists. And they won't be Christians. It's rubbish. I say specifically to you this morning, if you think the search for a vaccine can only be done by atheists because they're the only ones who have brains, then the reality, literally, the person in charge of the overall search for a vaccine bears testament to the fact that you're wrong. Maybe that's something to reflect on and think about and remember when you're tempted to believe all these loud people who claim it's only atheists who have got the insights of science on their side. Go with God, because I know He goes with you. Bye.